Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and today I'm going to be giving you a double helping of gameplay in the Bisonte C45. But firstly, before I start the commentary on these couple of games that I'm going to be playing, let me highlight how proud I am that yesterday, after a 12-hour stream, that we managed to raise nearly £51,000, excluding gift aid for cancer research and special effect. For everyone who doesn't know what a Great British Pound is, that roughly translates into about $70,000. A massive thank you to everyone who came along to the fundraiser yesterday. It's one of the most proud days of my life. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you, community. All right, so today I was kind of sitting back and thinking, what do I want to feature today? After such an emotional day yesterday, I really wanted to focus on something which has been giving me quite a lot of fun over the last month, and that has to be the Bisonte. And this vehicle, it seems to be quite controversial. Not because it's only available inside loot boxes, and you effectively have to gamble to be able to get this tank, but because some people in the community think it's actually really bad and an incredibly awful vehicle. And I just don't quite understand. I don't understand how a vehicle that has a very good turret, that has 10 degrees of gun depression, and can deal 1,000 damage, albeit it will take it 6 seconds to be able to deal 1,000 damage and then have very bad damage per minute afterwards to be able to reload, can be bad. Obviously, when something is able to have 360 alpha damage, reload the shells one by one, have all of the advantages of a vehicle that can fire cyclically in a single shot format, but also can then dump out all of the rounds one by one, is just absolutely outrageous. It's hard to be able to balance a vehicle like that. Now, I personally feel, as you all know from my tank review, the Wargaming got the balance of this vehicle pretty much about right. I think if it had been any better, it would have been too good. In fact, my opinion is that it's definitely on the good side of balanced now, but I don't feel like it's in a position where it's going to absolutely break the game. And surely that's what we want premium tanks to be like inside World of Tanks. We don't want them to be all running around just having every single advantage and making all of the tech tree vehicles and even the older premiums in the game just look absolutely useless. It's never going to be good for the balance of World of Tanks. I think a lot of people were expecting this new Italian auto-reloading heavy mechanic to just be absolutely game-changing, or to be some kind of new system to elevate the Italian auto-reloader past what effectively the medium tanks have become now that they've removed the gun rammer from that vehicle. I think one of the biggest mistakes that people are making with the Bisonte is immediately how they are setting this vehicle up. I can tell you, if you stack vertical stabilizers with a rotation device in this tank, you can tame what is an awful dispersion value that this tank has when you're moving and also when you're turning the turret. The dispersion values on this vehicle are 0.26 when moving, 0.26 when turning the turret, and 0.16, sorry, when turning the tank, 2.6, and then 0.16 when turning the turret. That's absolutely awful, and it does make this vehicle feel as if it has completely lackluster gun handling. But again, I think now with Equipment 2.0, Wargaming have enabled us to have ways to be able to make those really poor features of a vehicle that quite often hold it back, to mitigate them, to be able to then use all of the strengths of the tank. And that is, this is a fairly fast vehicle going forwards. The way that I've had success in this tank is not to go and simply trundle over to a heavy flank and then duke it out with heavy tanks that might have better armor, might have better DPM, and even have higher alpha damage. The way that I have been successful in this vehicle is by using it as a ridge-line brawler that wants to crush medium tanks, or even the lighter, heavy tanks that try to also take advantage of those positions. It's very similar to what I like to do with some of my faster Soviet heavy tanks, but those ones don't have the gun depression, so they work in a slightly different way. I've always believed that vehicles that don't have god-tier armor and aren't in a position where they can just sit in front of people and be completely safe do very much better against medium tanks and light tanks than they would do against heavy tanks. But their armor is useful against those vehicles because generally the mediums and the lights will have lower penetration. And also, your damage per minute in a vehicle like this doesn't matter so much when you're engaging vehicles with less hit points than you would be accustomed to on a heavy tank. And so that is how I've had a lot of success with my Bisonte. And it's also, a lot of it comes down to is making sure that you don't just fire the shells willy-nilly in this tank. You want to make sure that they count. You want to make them work, and you want to be using the right ammunition for the job. And in this case, we're making these armor-piercing rounds work very well against these heavy tanks. Now, heat rounds would have probably been the rounds to use there against the ISM, and you can see that I'm starting to reload the heat round in this tank. One thing I must highlight is that the only thing that really stops this vehicle from being outrageously overpowered is this abysmal damage per minute. As you will all know from my tank review, and this is adding on to the tank review, I've played about another 50 games in this vehicle since, and I've got a pretty darn good idea of how the vehicle is holding up. Just quickly before I conclude that remark, wow, that was a really bad idea to stop and give my big old Italian butt to 2 auto-loading French light tanks. That was an abysmal play. But as long as you wait and you don't fire too early, then your damage per minute starts to feel a little bit more comfortable in this tank. This vehicle, if you only fire the first shell, has 1,800 damage per minute. Far better than a vehicle like the T-34, for example. In fact, when I compare this tank to a T-34, I'd say it's got better hull armor. I don't think it's got better turret armor, at least frontally. It doesn't have the penetration that that tank has. And it doesn't have the alpha damage. But pretty much in all of the other areas, the Bisonte, especially with its auto-reloading capacity and its higher damage per minute in single-shot mode, just feels like a vastly superior tank. And so if the T-34, I don't think anyone's really going to be calling that thing an incredible vehicle. But if the T-34 is okay, then this vehicle is awesome. And I feel that this tank, I've been having a bit more success recently in this one than I have been having in the Renegade, because it just manages to be able to control the situation so much better. And with that, we managed to pick up our 6th kill of this game, 5,400 damage, and spoilers, the Banshee on 12T just runs away and we managed to cap out. Let's get into the next game as well. Really, when it comes down to it, the Bisonte is, I'd say, a more difficult heavy tank to play than something like a T-34 or a LIV or even like an E-75 TS. I think that this tank does favor somebody who's willing to try and push into a position, but also knows when it's time to be able to fall back as well. You'd never want to get yourself truly isolated in this vehicle, but hell, if you do and you manage to put in a couple of rounds and then reload them and then dump your magazine as you're being overwhelmed, you're still able to pick up roughly about 1,500 to 2,000 damage, and you're usually going to be taking out a vehicle or at least pulling your weight in that scenario, which at least gives your team a chance to win. The times when I feel that vehicles just absolutely lose horrifically in World of Tanks is where your team is just useless, the enemy are going to overwhelm you. And I have to admit, playing the Bisonte, I do have those kind of situations where it just feels that you're absolutely useless in a tank like this. If the enemies come at you with multiple vehicles, or they're playing something like a G-Saw 1008 like we see on the enemy team, and those vehicles are a pure autoloader. Unlike this, which is kind of a pseudo-autoloader because of its long intra-clip reload of 3 seconds. And so you just have to find this middle ground. It's kind of like a jack-of-all-trades auto-loading heavy tank. It's not going to be the best damage dealer in burst combat like a T-77. But it's also not going to ever be isolated and just completely useless like that vehicle. And if bad RNG happens, then the auto-reloader can allow you to count for it. Alright, so we've got ourselves a pretty tricky situation here. I've decided to give up the western flank. I thought that I would do better by using my good top speed in this tank of 50 kilometers an hour top speed limit on this vehicle. Although I have to admit, with the 12.46 power to weight ratio this vehicle has, it's very hard to actually be able to get up to that consistently. Would I use a turbo on this tank? No, this vehicle really has to be using vertical stabilizers, a rotation device, and in my opinion, vents. You could drop the vents, I guess, but then you'd be making everything about this vehicle worse, and importantly, you'd be lowering the rather abysmal damage per minute that this tank has. So I'm really set on that loadout for this vehicle. And it's also been helping me with a lot of my other auto-loaders as well, and auto-reloaders, just to have that kind of combat capacity. It's always interesting that even after 10 years of playing this game, I'm still rethinking my priorities when I'm trying to set up a vehicle or how I'm going to play. And I feel like Equipment 2.0 has given us more opportunity to be able to reassess the fundamentals of where you'd want to invest the statistics of your tank than ever before. So the Bisonte here managed to block 3 rounds from the Ferdinand, and this is where the artillery are really starting to give us a good time. I'm just trying to lock down the tracks of the Ferdinand here, and we can see it really worked out. That's because we got over 1,000 tracking, as it looks like the G-Saw on my team manages to put all 4 rounds into the Ferdinand. Although these Ferdinands are doing a pretty darn good job of holding back our team. We can see the Scorpion's lost some hit points, the ISU-152K has lost some hit points, and the G-Saw has as well. In retrospect, I wonder if I should push around this corner, but this is where this vehicle is actually rather bad at making an assault, because you have to have these long periods of downtime. The third round on this vehicle takes 17 seconds to reload, the second 15 seconds, and the first shell 12 seconds. So that means that if you have to fire early like that, while you're going to get a bit of compensation, because of the new mechanic that the Italian auto-reloader heavies have, it just feels as if the DPM does hold it back from being a true breakthrough tank. And I think that's probably why a lot of people just, maybe it's not their playstyle, or alternatively they have been struggling in the vehicle. Alright, so this is where I just love this tank. You're going to see just absolutely why I adore this vehicle. And it is just about firing a single shell and waiting. A lot of people might come around the corner and put 3 into the Ferdinand. Why would I do that? If I fire all 3 of my shells, I am vulnerable and they can push around the corner and they can catch me reloading. Never fire more than you have to unless the situation dictates it, and that you're going to have an extraordinary long time to be able to reload. If you've got to make sure that you're never ever caught reloading inside the Bisonte, just like you would do in an autoloader. And look, we've blocked 2,000 damage here. These are big pen rounds that these Ferdinands have, and they realize something a little too late, and that is that they needed to push. And that is how you can apply pressure in your auto-reloaders to vehicles. Control the engagement, shoot them one by one, and then you're the fear factor. As long as you never manage to bounce your shells or you waste your rounds, then to all intents and purposes, you've got 1,000 damage saved up and nobody wants to push around the corner into that. So I asked my ISU-152K, let's go back, let's defend the base, let's try and stop the Western advance, but unfortunately, the G-Saw pops around the corner, puts rounds into us, and now I'm going to pressure him while he's reloading. I fire early, and that's really awkward, but I have to get out of this situation as there's a Super Hellcat above me, there's 1 artillery to my right, and there's 1 directly ahead of me. And now there's an E-25 shooting me in the backside as well, who has removed 276 of my hit points, and we are in a high-pressure situation. But I'm reloading high-explosive rounds, so I'm wondering, who should I shoot right now? Should I fire, or should I try and save? And you'll see that I'm going to go backwards to bait the Lorraine into trying to ram me. He actually manages to take me down to 2 hit points, and I got to hold, stop the artillery before he clutch shots me, and I've got 1 round left in the tank. But I should not fire. If I fire, I'm going to lower my DPM to a point where I can no longer fight back. So I'm going to wait, hold. This is the only way I'm going to get out of this situation. Grit your teeth, bear it. Now fire 1 into the Super Hellcat with my 400 Alpha, and oh, disaster. The artillery actually manages to stun me but doesn't damage me, which means that my reticle blooms out from the stun and I'm not able to put the clutch shot into the Super Hellcat. Instead, the shell hits the tracks. The high explosive rounds I was using to be able to gain the alpha damage to be able to shut down the Super Hellcat in 2 shots are unable to be able to go through the space protection that the tracks give, and unfortunately, he manages to finally find the lower plate on the Bisonte. But I really wanted to show this engagement because it shows all of the great things about the Bisonte, but also all of the bad things about the Bisonte. That bad DPM allowing me to be able to fight my way out of this situation. Other heavy tanks might have been able to consistently bounce the Super Hellcat from the front and have decent DPM to be able to handle the vehicles. Unfortunately, we had to come around the corner, waste that kind of big DPM chunk against the G-Saw, and ended up in a situation where we were never truly going to be able to dig our way out of it. We were so controlled in our fights against the Ferdinand, and in my rush to be able to shut down the G-Saw before he possibly reloaded, and then he'd be able to take me out, we ended up making ourselves vulnerable to the trio of vehicles that were defending the cap. So the first round in the Bisonte was an ace tanker for the high caliber, and the top gun that we managed to nail. 1,639 base is a big game for this vehicle with 5,400 damage and 153,000 credits profit due to the holiday ops event that is going on. Our second game was a first class medal in a defeat due to the courageous resistance we received for getting the high caliber medal and a patrol duty medal. It's definitely something that I have been really enjoying with this tank, is that it is a 50 km/h top speed limit, but unless you're going down slope, you're going to be coasting at about 40 to 45 in this tank. I use that to get into forefront positions to try and dominate a ridge and to try and take the fight to either medium tanks or tank destroyers that you can manage to catch out, as we saw in this replay. And that allowed us to be able to pick up 2,600 damage upon detecting or tracking, and also deal 3,600 damage ourselves. And we blocked nearly 4,000 damage this game, showing you what you can do with the turret armor of this tank, even when you're getting shot by the 246mm of penetration that the Ferdinands will have. So to answer the question posed by this video, is the Bisonte trash? In my opinion, it's not. I think this is at least a good tank, if not a great tank, if you can make all of the strengths of the vehicle work. Now, of course, this tank isn't going to be everyone. That's what an opinion is. Some people are going to like a tank's playstyle, some people are not going to like a tank's playstyle. However, it's also very important to realize that wargaming will only buff, but never nerf, a premium tank. In turn, this means that people like me have a responsibility to not jump to conclusions too quickly, as wargaming undoubtedly listen to our opinions, which means that community contributors like myself need to really think about how influential their conclusions might be. And for the Bisonte, the vehicle is already packing a 51.63% average win ratio. This is higher than the somewhat SM on the European server. It's higher than last year's gift box tank, the E75TS. This is a very respectable win ratio. If not, it's actually slightly higher than it should be if you would truly consider the tank was balanced, at least against its tech tree counterparts. And I'd personally like to commend wargaming for the Bisonte C45. I feel that they've got the balance about right. In my opinion, it still might be a little bit too good, but it has a unique playstyle, its own identity, and more importantly, it's not outrageously overpowered and going to be destroying the matchmaking. Which is how I think we can all agree premium tanks should always be inside World of Tanks. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that's it for today. Hopefully you all enjoyed this one. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And let me know what you think about the Bisonte. Do you think the vehicle is outrageously trash, even though it's getting an above 51.5% average win ratio on the European server? Do you feel it's about right, or do you feel that it's completely overpowered? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.